Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Thank you very much, lovely Sama Najun and Rachel, for joining us today. And we are privileged to have you with us. And we look forward to talking about a very important subject today, which is Islam is freedom within responsibility. And we're going to go deeper into that. First of all, of course, as always, with the Qur'an. And of course, also with our dear teacher, Sayyid Mehdi Imam Razvi, alayhi salam. So, I really want to jump into it, but before we get into this lovely and very controversial topic, maybe one of the most controversial topics that we'll address in the first year, which are the Islamic principles according to Imam Razvi. Usul ad-Din, as we would say. Why do we say Islam is freedom as one of the main Usul ad-Din? But before we go into that, I'd like to go a little bit into the homework that we were, or the teamwork that we were going to be challenged with last week. So I kindly ask you just to share some reflections also in this class about your teamwork from last week. I know that it was a bit, or last month. I know that it was a little bit, let's say, challenging for some of us because of some time-constrained issues. But I would love to hear your reflections. So the homework, just to remember, was because last principle was Islam is reason. Okay, this was one of the Usul ad-Din. Islam is reason. And one of the or the main teamwork really was to explain how in our daily lives the principle of Islam being reason manifests itself. And one of the examples that quite quickly came was the discussion on music, which developed in some different directions. So I'd be interested to hear from you, maybe starting with Rachel. What is your feeling about Islam? Is music accepting or not accepting? Is art accepting or not accepting? Is beauty accepting or not accepting? What part of music or art or beauty itself is acceptable and not acceptable? And how would you frame that in the framework of reason, being Islam is reason? So I'm interested to hear from you, and then of course from Sama Najun, if she'd like to also speak on it.
Okay, Bismillah. I have to laugh because my first degree is in music, so I'm a bit biased.
What kind of music? Would you tell us? What kind of music?
Oh, classical violin. Back in the day. That's a long time ago, but yeah.
Great.
So alhamdulillah. Yeah. So but you know, it's funny because I think when I was going through the process of contemplating converting to Islam when I was doing my degree, and I remember I was attending a class with some rather austere well, I think actually she may have been a member of the Muslim Brotherhood back in the day, but
wow. Yeah.
I didn't know anything back in those days. And there wasn't very much available for converts anyway. And I remember her saying to me, what are you going to do when you convert and you've got to give up music and all this and that? And I kind of didn't have any idea how to respond to that. So, but anyway, to answer your question, for me, I think it really boils down to what brings you closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and what takes you further away from him. And so consequently, and the other thing too is that as a musician, music is essentially it's the physics of the universe. It's how everything, all the sound that we make is essentially based on physics. And so when we recite the Qur'an, we are making music because it's the properties of the sound waves that we're using. So when they say that music is prohibited, to me that is what they're saying really is that certain types of music are prohibited. Not you can't prohibit music itself because it's part of the physics of the universe. So for me, it's what brings you closer and what takes you further away. And it is true. I actually looked at, I was reading a paper. I don't know how I managed to stumble across it, but it was actually a computer analysis of it was massive database analysis of words in various genres of pop music and rap and this and that. And I'm not of the position that you should just ban genres outright, like all rap or all pop or all whatever. But what was interesting to me was when they were doing the analysis of the words, English language words, was particularly in rap music, how much of it was very much centered on racism, on misogyny, and that to me is demonstrative of what I would say I would not personally choose to align myself with and listen to, because I think it has an influence on your soul.
Of course.
But just to categorize and that's reason. I think that's what the role of reason is, that because the Qur'an tells you to reflect, and it tells you to think, and it tells you to say, to use your mind in order to understand what brings you to God and what drives you away. So that's my perspective, inshallah khair.
I mean, Bismillah. Yeah, that's a great story, great background. So, did you give up music then, or do you continue playing for yourself, or do you still give concerts, or where do you stand on that? I'm just very curious.
Well, the funny thing is that I was doing this music degree, and then I started taking Arabic at the same time, because I was getting all interested in this, and then I was like, oh, I love this. I want to do this. This is fantastic. I want to do Islamic studies. I want to do Arabic. Oh, this is what I want to do. And it was not, I wasn't giving up music. It was just more that I was like, oh, I know what I want to do with my life now. So I didn't give up music, but I changed my career. But interestingly, I was very, very keen for my daughter to learn some fashion of musical instruments. So she ended up learning the piano. But I did. It's funny. I didn't actually pursue a career in music after all, but it wasn't because I was giving it up. It was just because I discovered that I really loved Arabic and Islamic studies. Sure.
Oh, that's great. Great stuff. So yeah, I happen to have a musical vein myself, and I have a similar story. I was actually, when I was about 16, 17, I was playing about 6 to 8 hours of guitar or classical guitar per day. And but I realized that I couldn't, I just felt very trapped in the concept of someone else's music. And I felt like, as good as an interpreter you could possibly be on the European classical music side, you would always be a slave to the composition in a way. So I had to kind of leave that for some years, and then finally, many years later, I discovered Indian classical music, or Hindustani classical music, which is, very much improvisation based and very much, very free and very open,
like jazz.
Yeah, really, it is like jazz. Yeah. If you've played jazz, then you know what I'm talking about. So it's I have played jazz also, and it's very much like that. You have a basic kind of framework. Within that, you can do basically anything you want. And this is very good bridge to our subject from today, because Islam is also like that. Islam is also like this. So Islam gives you a basic framework, okay, which we call the Shariat. And within that, you can do basically anything you want. Okay, as long as you stay on the framework, yeah. And if you don't stay on the framework, it's not that you can't commit sin. Of course you can, yeah. You have the freedom to commit a sin, but what happens is that you have to bear the consequence. Okay, so have you played jazz, or are you familiar with jazz at all, since you mentioned it?
Oh, yeah. And it's very similar too, because I found that quite difficult, because when I was trained as a classical musician, and so you have to follow the rules. That's the sort of the whole point of it, is that you imitate the great masters until you get to such a refined point that you're allowed to break them. Like Bach broke the rules of, but you have to be at the absolute pinnacle. Whereas, and then when I started to learn jazz, I was like, oh, but it's not written down. Like, I've got the chord progressions, but what do you mean I've got to improvise and come up with? And it was quite difficult for me to transition into that.
Right. Yeah, I mean, we can just have this conversation then on the basis of music almost, because we can continue the musical analogy, because it's completely like that. Look, the Qur'an, if you will, yeah, if you want to put it that way, okay, this beautiful book is 114 surahs or chapters, in which the entire Shariat is basically opened up to us, yeah? And within that Shariat, we have a lot of freedom to move, and we have a lot of leeway to kind of go and take our lives in different directions, whether it be family lives, personal lives, careers, location where we live, you know, lifestyle that we choose to live, but everything within a certain framework, yeah? And once you leave the framework, it's like making bad music in a way, yeah? Your life becomes like a bad song, yeah? Where either there's no melody, or you're out of rhythm, or the harmony is not in conjunction with, you know, the melody that you're playing. Something is somehow out of tune, yeah? And so
atonal music.
What's that? Yeah. Then you go into
Like
Schoenberg, or you go into Ornette Coleman, or all these, you know, crazy directions that never work.
Yeah.
And you end up in this postmodern mess.
Yeah, but that's the thing. It was all about deconstructing. It's all about deconstruction. And that's I think the main issue that I have with a lot of you know, sort of the whole notion of postmodernity is that it's all about deconstructing the past. Now, obviously there's a lot of problems with the way that, you know, that obviously there was problems with the, say for example, with structures of, you know, the way the church was infused in the state, or the way that, you know, gender hierarchies meant that women were oppressed or whatever. So I think it needed challenging, but there was nothing to build up from that. There was it was only about deconstructing. Sorry, I'm going off on a real tangent.
No, it's not a tangent whatsoever. It's not a tangent whatsoever. It's perfectly on it's on tune, it's on time, and it's in harmony. So it's musical. No, I'm totally with you on that. And actually, one of the rare things that I offer in year 3 in our Islamic philosophy class, which I hope, you know, hopefully you'll attend, inshallah, after next year would be year 2, Islamic fiqh, or Islamic law, according to Imam Razvi, usul al-fiqh to be exact, the roots of jurisprudence. And then after that, we have a year 3, which is Islamic philosophy. And at the end of the year, I actually do a module of about 3 to 4 weeks on what I call Islamic reconstructivism, which is, now you've been born into, or you've somehow dived into this postmodern mess in which we live in today, where everything is just pure deconstruction, deconstructing religion, deconstructing morality, deconstructing ethics, deconstructing states, deconstructing even gender, deconstructing everything, and deconstructing art, of course, and then you have to kind of look around, and you kind of start to pick up the pieces, and you say, well, if nothing is nothing, you know, why am I here? You know, you kind of come back to this fundamental ontological question, or philosophical question, which is, if nothing is nothing, why am I here? And what you start to realize is that there is something, there's some root in the ground that is continuing to move this life process forward, and that same energy that's moving this life process forward, you know, despite all our deconstructivist efforts to pretend that it's the opposite, is also the source of love, and it's also the source of knowledge and wisdom, and the source of mercy, and the source of patience, and the source of peace, and the source of so many things that we as Muslims would attribute to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the terms of the 99 names of Allah, or attributes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And you realize that all of these infinite sources, or that the source of life happen to be the source of all these attributes, you realize that source must be an infinite source of love and wisdom, and that can only be what the Muslims call Allah. So when you've reached this point, you kind of come to terms with postmodernism as a genre in general. And I'd like to expand on that in year 3, because I think it's really important that we not only talk about Islamic philosophy, you know, we talk about Ibn Sina, and we talk about Ibn Rushd, and Ghazali, and Farabi, and all the kind of Sadr Shirazi, and all the great Muslim philosophers of the past, but we also have to, you know, relate Islamic philosophy to where we are today. And certainly we are finding ourselves, as you mentioned properly, in this kind of, you know, spider web of deconstructivism and postmodernism. And the question is, you know, what is the way out of that, or what is the next step outside of that, and or beyond that even? How do you break the web and be free, from this situation? And so I hope you join us in year 3, and anyone who's listening would join us in year 3 for Islamic philosophy, at the end of which we would also definitely host a module on Islamic reconstructivism. So, and you'll find that the Islam after deconstruction is very different from the Islam before reconstruction. Okay, why? I'll just go into this a little bit. I don't want to take away year 3 now completely, but the reason for that is simply that once you've gone through a phase where, at the very least, the hierarchy of morality is challenged and in fact deconstructed or even destroyed, destructed, as it were, you're free to believe whatever you want, and this is the environment that we find ourselves in, is that we're free to believe whatever we want, whenever we want. We're free to change religions. We're free to stay with one religion. We can change worldviews. We can read the Quran in a different way. So I can say, I'm a Muslim, but I read the Quran in a different way than someone else reads it, okay? Or I'm a Muslim, but I have a teacher who interprets the Quran in a different way that I do, okay? Or to make a more kind of a detailed reference, I'm a Muslim, but I'm a skeptic of hadith, for example, So I don't just take the Sahih al-Sitta, which are the 6 so-called Sahih books of the Sunni corpus, or I don't just take the 4 Sahih Shia books, especially Jafari books particularly. I'm free to say I take what I like of it and I leave what I don't like, And no one can stop me from that, okay? No one can stop you from that either, And this is where the dialogue begins. This is where the conversation begins. And that's why if you look at postmodern philosophy, particularly reconstructive philosophy or reconstructivist philosophy, truth is no longer a kind of absolute dogma. And I love the way that the words absolute and obsolete in English have a very similar structure. Absolute is now obsolete. So there's no absolutism in a religion anymore. And a lot of things are becoming obsolete, okay? So the question is, after obsolete has defeated absolute, what is left? And what is left are a bunch of strands. Absolutely, it's happening so fast. Like, it's just a complete... It's a philosophical revolution that people, are not realizing, and the social media are, really pushing that even further and further. And so this continues to develop. And what happens is that the strands of truth, it's kind of like looking in a big rubble, and you're looking for your things in a rubble. This is a horrible example for our current days, but imagine you went into a messy room and you were looking for your jacket, okay? And you found 3 jackets on the ground. Okay, from those 3 jackets that you found in the big mess of your room that's not cleaned for months, you look at the 3 and you take the one you want, because you don't put on 3 jackets at the same time, right? But you take the one that you want, and for that particular season or for that particular weather or for what you're doing at that particular time, that's the jacket that you want to wear, okay? And so reconstructivism is very similar. So obsolete has defeated absolute. And now just everything is like a big chaos and a big mess. At the same time, we have so much freedom. What do we do with this freedom? And people go in different directions. When you give someone, all this freedom, like especially in the Western nations, and it's kind of unfair to you to say Western because you're down under in Australia, but obviously the roots of your culture are very similar to what we call the West today.
I know. I actually pose that. Sorry, I was going to say I pose that to my students. I say, right. I have a big map on the screen, and I say, all right, can you show me what's Western civilization? And they kind of then they have a look at the map, and they've got to pinpoint where it is, and then it kind of goes, the penny drops. And then I'd say to them, well, what makes Australia, for example, Western? And they'll say things like, oh, but it was the British settled it. I said, well, so did Malaysia. They settled Malaysia too. So what? And English is the primary language in Nigeria. So what is it that makes us Western? So they have to try and think about that, and it kind of, because it's in a preamble to do with colonialism. So, but cool. So Australia, so
you can totally relate to what I'm talking about. So
definitely,
To put it in a nutshell, we experience a lot of freedom because freedom is the kind of post-enlightenment fruit of Enlightenment philosophy. Okay, let's just put it that way. And because of that, because we somehow in the West, let me just call it the West, for lack of a better term, we took down the dogma of the Catholic Church in particular, and minimized the effects of the church, whether Catholic, Protestant, Anglican, what have you. And this opened the door to many scientific and mathematic and cultural and artistic and philosophical discoveries that became the Enlightenment. And then from the Enlightenment, going through the Romantic period and modernism and all of that, you know, you end up in this, after World War II, after all the modernist, the kind of big modernist ideas like fascism and communism and all of that kind of collapsed, you know, people became so reactive against all of this kind of dogmatic thinking that postmodernism was born, deconstructivism was born, and very rightfully so for its time. All the ethics and morals and all those kind of big absolutist structures became obsolete, right? And or are becoming obsolete. They still have a lot of power. Now, we're not completely done with the modern era either, right? That's what a good friend of mine who's a professor in Barcelona in philosophy, he's always telling me, he says, we're not done with modernism yet, yeah? Despite the fact that we're kind of trying to force reconstructivism or postmodernism, but we're still not even finished with modernism. Especially in Islam, you know, people are very much on modernist kind of tracks sometimes, which is a bit disappointing. But to make a long story short, so the idea that you would, you know, that you would kind of put on the jacket of truth as it might fit the situation is very much what we call a reconstructivist thought, and is a kind of a way out of postmodernism, in the same way that postmodernism or deconstructivism was a way out of this kind of absolutist fascist thinking of the modern period. Yeah, definitely. Yeah, if you're talking about it is as postmodernism, yeah, I kind of agree with that. Exactly. Yeah, exactly. It is a necessary evolution, but it's necessary to break free to become an adult. And that's really what freedom in Islam means. Yeah. Islamist freedom means exactly that. It means now in my age, I have a completely different reference from maybe someone, I'm 45, you know, someone who's from my generation, but their grandparents were born in, let's say, Libya, okay? Or they were born in Malaysia, or they were born in Turkey, or they were born in Oman, or wherever they were born in the Muslim world, but they were born into a family, and they had a very cozy little kind of baby crib, which was their family and their culture and their morals and their ethics and their madhab, their kind of what they call school of jurisprudence in Islam, and everything was completely laid out for them, okay? And we don't have that anymore in that sense because of the modern, postmodern, and now postmodern evolution of events. Okay, of course, there are still those pockets and those areas and those things still exist, but now even someone from Libya or Oman or Iran or Morocco or where have you can get into the same Instagram, they can go into the same Facebook, the same Google, the same Wikipedia, and they can get access to the same information as everyone else. And that means that for the first time, maybe in human history, or to maybe link it back to the early period of Islam, after the death of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, when the discussion was in which direction is the ummah going to go, for the first time we're having serious dialogues again about, number one, Islamic unity. What is unity exactly in Islam? And also having dialogues and conversations about, you know, okay, how do the Maliki madhab see the issue of, you know, praying with your hands on your chest or praying with your hands on the side, okay? So things like this. Or this is the kind of more outward level, or more deep levels are, for example, what is the role of the Ahlul Bayt, alayhum assalam ajma'in, in Islamic spirituality? Okay, so that's another more deep level, and you'll have, you know, Sunni opinions, and you'll have Shia opinions, and you'll have all kinds of different opinions. And also within the same madhab, you might have different opinions. So someone who's a Hanafi in Turkey might give the Ahlul Bayt a higher preference than maybe someone from Afghanistan, okay? Even though they're both Hanafis, okay? So you see all these kind of discussions happening all over the world and shaping the world. And at the same time, each one of us can kind of jump into this pool of information, and we can contribute our own forms of information, like we're doing in this Hawza, which is basically the concept of our unity. Hawza is exactly that. It's to bring people from all the different madhahib consciously together to try to form conversation platforms and let these kind of reconstructivist dialogues happen. Because, as the famous Italian, now passed away recently, God bless his soul, Gianni Vattimo said, truth is a conversation. Okay, so we're no longer at the point in human philosophical history that we say truth is an absolute dogma, that someone is giving you, like a father would kind of spoon feed their child and have them eat it. But truth is now a conversation between equals. So if and it even goes beyond Islam, so I could have a conversation with a Jewish person about Palestine, for example, and they might have a completely different opinion than mine, but as long as I'm ready to adhere to the rules of, cultured conversation, civilized conversation, I can at least sit down and talk with them and tell them, these are my arguments, this is my opinion, and this is my viewpoint, and they can do exactly the same. Or they might surprisingly have a similar viewpoint as mine, because of course fortunately there are many adherents to the children of Israel that don't agree with the genocide that's happening in Palestine, thank God. So as you can see with all the protests in New York City by the Jewish population, for example. So so having a dialogue is absolutely paramount to finding the truth today, whereas in earlier times, having a dialogue could get you shot or killed or somehow basically eliminated. Okay, you asked a question, you're out, yeah? Like I had a friend who was Afghani, and this was maybe a generation ago. He was an older guy. And he said, if we dare to question anything that the teacher said about the Quran, they would take a stick and just whip us, yeah? So obviously these times, at least in our part of the world, are finished. And it's good that way. It's good because Islam is freedom, okay? Islam is freedom because it's necessary that a free environment is existent in order that a person may, on their own choice, on their own volition, out of their own free will, choose a direction, namely Islam, okay? If a person doesn't have the right to choose, it's not Islam. It can't be Islam because that person was forced to do it. And there's no compulsion in religion. That's why the Qur'an says, Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim, A'udhu Billahi Minash Shaitanir Rajim, لا إكراه في الدين قد تبين الرشد من الغي فمن يكفر بالطاغوت ويؤمن بالله فقد استمسك بالعروة الوثقى لا انفصام لها والله سميع عليم صدق الله العلي العظيم. Okay, so this is the famous there's no compulsion in religion, there's no compulsion in religion verse, and it's in Surah Baqarah, and it's number 256, and it's after Ayat al-Kursi. According to the Sunni method of counting Ayat al-Kursi. For the Shia, the Ayat al-Kursi is actually three ayats, so it's 255, 256, and 257, and it's to be read, almost like a mini surah as itself for the Shia. To make a long story short, it's very close to Ayat al-Kursi, or it's inside Ayat al-Kursi, and everyone who looks up Baqarah, the second chapter of the Quran, verse 256 can find this very clearly. There's no compulsion in religion, okay? Now, those who would want to constrain Islam to be compulsive, okay, they like to ignore this verse, or they like to change the meaning of this verse, or they like to put this verse below a lot of other verses that sound very compulsive, or they gnash their teeth in anger when people mention this verse. But there's really no other way this verse itself is so absolutist. There's no compulsion in religion. La ikraha fi din is so destructive in its way that there's no way around it as a jurisprudential foundation for the study of Islamic fiqh or Islamic law, as to say that there's no compulsion in religion. Now, what's the opposite of no compulsion? I'll let you answer that. If there's no compulsion, what is there? Jab. Yeah, right, exactly. So what would we say, what would we call it in English?
Compulsion.
No. The opposite of, no, what I'm saying is the opposite of compulsion.
Oh, well, the opposite of compulsion is freedom. Yeah.
Right? So very easily we got to that point and we said Islam is freedom. Okay? And we were able to extract it from the Holy Quran. I'm happy to show it to anyone who has doubts. I'm happy to show it to anyone who has doubts. Here it is. Here it is. La ikraha fi din, qad tabayyana ar-rushd min al-ghayy. Take a snapshot. Stop your videos. There it is. In Arabic. Probably reverse in English.
Yeah.
Okay. I hope you saw it. Yeah, exactly. That was correct. So now you can say, how can you base all of Islamic jurisprudence on one verse? Okay, well, you can. It's not a problem. Allah is providing a book, which is, according to the Baqarah itself, Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim, A'udhu Billahi Minash Shaitanir Rajeem, Alif Lam Mim, ذَلِكَ الْكِتَابُ لَا رَيْبَ فِيهِ هُدًى لِلْمُتَّقِينَ. So it's Baqarah, verses 1 and 2. These verses are known to all the Muslims. Okay. So is the Quran wrong? Yeah, is it wrong? Okay, if it's wrong, you left Islam. Okay, no problem. It's your choice. Because there's no compulsion in religion, we say, you're free. Please go. Yeah? And we don't want people in Islam who don't want to be Muslims. So if you think there is compulsion in Islam, you left Islam. You're free to go and create a different religion, and you can call it what you want. You can call it what you want. But fundamentally, Islam is freedom. Alhamdulillah. And it means that without freedom, there can be no Islam. There can only be compulsion. And Islam means the soul is free to choose. Therefore, قَدْ تَبَيَّنَ الرُّشْدُ مِنَ الْغَيِّ. Okay, the path of right and wrong has been clearly separated, okay, or clearly defined. This is the meaning of قَدْ تَبَيَّنَ الرُّشْدُ مِنَ الْغَيِّ, which follows La ikraha fi din, which follows there's no compulsion in religion. However, okay, it doesn't say however, but the thinking intellectual will realize that the however is said silently, is implied, okay? It's implicit, because the clear path, the right from the wrong has been clearly defined, yeah? It's been clarified what is right and what is wrong, to translate it more exactly. So it's your choice now. You go the right path or the wrong path, okay? Now, how do you know what's the right path and the wrong path? So now we're going deeper. That's why you need more study of the Quran, inshallah, okay? And when you study the Quran, you will find extremely many similarities with the Tawrat and the Injil, okay? With the Torah and with the Bible. You shall not kill, you shall not steal, you shall not covet your neighbor's wife, you shall not, okay? It's basically the same set of commandments that were revealed to Prophet Moses, Hazrat Musa alayhi salam, and Prophet Jesus, Hazrat Isa alayhi salam. It's not changed, yeah? We in Islam believe that each of the prophets simply passed on the same message to a different group of people. Many of them were known, but the vast majority were not known. That's why we speak in Islam of 124,000 prophets. Wallahul a'lam, one for every peoples at every time on the earth, so that there could never be a doubt of which is the right, the rushd, and which is the ghai, the wrong path. Okay, so yeah, you have freedom, yeah, but that doesn't mean there's not right and wrong. The freedom that you have is to choose between what is right and what is wrong. What is right and what is wrong is defined by a closer study of Shariat. Now, many people who go into this discussion, especially from the West, they will say things like, oh yeah, so if I, charge interest rate, it's okay. All right. Or if some guys think they can just take a second wife without consent from their first wife, they think it's okay, What do you get? Only problems, only problems by going in this direction. Why? Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is trying to teach you that no, yeah, you're free to choose, but the law of karma is inescapable and unavoidable. And at the same time, it's your best teacher. Okay? Karma is the best teacher because no one really at the end of the day wants to listen to a teacher like me or one of these mullahs waving their finger and saying this is right and this is wrong and these are the kuffar and these are the mushrik and these are the believers and these will go to Jannat and these will go to Jahannam. No one wants to hear. Yeah? Okay. But finally, in the last consequence, karma will be your best teacher. And for those who are blessed by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, when they make a mistake on the path, Allah will show them very quickly by giving them a visible karma. I cheated on my husband, so he left me. Okay, that's your karma. Eat it. Okay? Or I stole from my neighbor, so I ended up in jail for 5 years. Yeah, okay. You ate it. Yeah. Now, this is not to say that all of the injustices that happen in the world, and this is actually with my lovely wife, Samana June, who's listening now, I hope, was actually, we were having a wonderful conversation today about karma. And what is the difference between the Islamic perspective of Shariat and the yogic perspective on karma? And we talked a lot about that. And so that's a very, very deep conversation, maybe to be had another day in this context or in another context. But the bottom line is when we are free to choose what we want out of life, and specifically now within religion, this freedom also increases the responsibility that is on our shoulders, okay? With freedom comes responsibility. Before, I wasn't free to choose to be Muslim. Okay, I was in a Shafi'i family in Syria, and that's just how my parents grew up. So I prayed with my father and mother, and I ate halal with 3 fingers, and I, basically wore a certain set of clothes and this and that. So in those days, even just 2 generations ago, there was really, for a Muslim culture, there was nothing except Shariat. So people would just follow it because that was what was implemented in the society, the Shariat that was known to that specific society. That's another big subject that we'll get into in year 2, Islamic fiqh or usul al-fiqh, the roots of Islamic jurisprudence, inshallah, because that's where we learn about what are the cultural specifics of a certain set of Sharia and why maybe a Hanafi in Turkey and Afghanistan and Libya are different from each other, okay? Even though they all consider themselves to subscribe to Hanafi madhab. So to make a long story short, and you were taking the example of a teenager growing up. So when you're a child, your parents kind of tell you have to do this, you have to do this, and you can whine and scream and cry, but at the end of the day, you have to do what is prescribed to you by your parents, okay? And when you grow up, you have to start taking your own responsibility. So paying your own bills, going to work by yourself, answering with your neighbor, answering with your work colleagues, and of course with your marital relationships and your spouse. Here's my little baby. I think he wants to come. Come, Juno. Come here, baby. Come here. Come to class. Yeah, look at this little one. You see?
Oh, mashallah.
Thank you.
Oh, assalamu alaikum. Assalamu alaikum. Oh, how beautiful.
Yeah.
What's his name?
His name is Mahdi Kuraj.
Oh, Mahdi Kuraj. Assalamu alaikum. Oh, my daughter's 20 now. I miss the baby days.
What's that?
My daughter is 20.
Oh, that's
and
wonderful.
I love her.
Congratulations.
She's very independent, but I miss the baby days.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, sure. That's how it always goes, right?
Yeah.
I've got two older ones who are 16 and 12, and of course I miss the baby days also. So I totally know. So, again, a little baby like that, now you put that baby in any part of the world and they will take all of the customs and cultures and absorb everything that they're experiencing in that culture. And so therefore their worldview is very much shaped by that culture. Nice hat. He's got a great hat. So and then when they get older, then they start to take their own responsibility and their actions. God, basically Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, bases his choice or gives the karma in a way that is corresponding with their actions. That's somehow a law of the universe that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created so that we could learn from our mistakes, so that we could grow spiritually and take the next step. So that's why freedom, whether in Islam or otherwise, the freedom that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given us in our lives is always associated with an equivalence in responsibility. Less freedom, less responsibility. More freedom, more responsibility. There is a 100% direct correlation between freedom and responsibility. Okay. Are there any questions on that so far or comments that you'd like to make?
I probably should give Samira a chance to speak. Samina, is it? Sorry.
Is that your daughter or?
No. I'm just looking. The other participant, Samina.
Samane, yeah.
Samane.
I think she's very occupied now with a little baby.
Oh, good. Okay, because I feel like I'm sort of.
با آزادی هستیم، یعنی که اگر تو آزادی داری یعنی هم یعنی حق داری چیز خوب بکنی یا بد بکنی از چیز توست یعنی. بگو. یعنی فکر ما هست که کمتر یعنی آزاد داری کمتر الله یعنی از تو رو کمتر یعنی حق میگیره.
اصلا اگر آزادی نیست انسان با انیمال چی دیفرنت است؟
راست.
من فکر میکنم یعنی خب انسان چند چیز داره که با انیمال دیفرنت هست، اما هر چیز انادر چیز رو فکر کنی یک لولش رو با انیمال داره، مثل احساس، مثل عقل، که مثلا میگم انسان چون احساس داره مثلا با انیمال دیفرنت هست، یا چون عقل داره با انیمال دیفرنت هست، اما انیمال ها هم یک لول از عقل و احساس
دارن درست.
این چیزی دیفرنت هست. انیمال با آزادی یعنی ما با چشم فکر کنیم اینا چند فری هستن، پرنده به سرجا میخواد میره، اما نه این نیست. آنها جست با فطرتشون میتونن زندگی کنن.
راست.
زمستان باید بره جایی،
راست. میرن جنوب و راست.
این هست، این چیزی که باید این رو بکنی که زندگی داره. اما انسان همه چیز رو با اختیار و آزادی میتونه، با آزادی میتونه انتخاب چوز کنه، یعنی داد بشه. پس only چیز که 100% just هست for انسان و این رو از another چیز از فرشته چیز دیفرنت کنه و میکنه اشرف مخلوقات خلیفت الله هست آزادیه. پس اگر آزادی رو گرفتی دیگه این خلیفت الله نیست، اصلا انسان نیست. پس like نمیدونم مورچه birds هر another چیز اما انسان نیست.
ترجمه کنم با اجازه دیدم. So, Samana June is saying basically that freedom is actually the basis of humanity, because if you look at the animals, of course, they have a certain level of intelligence and a certain level of consciousness. But at the end of the day, when the weather gets colder, the birds fly south, yeah? And when the weather gets warmer again, the birds fly north. So in a way, they're caught up in their cyclical, natural patterns as God created, subhanahu wa ta'ala, the nature patterns, the patterns of nature. And there's not so much that they could do or even would want to do to break out of those patterns, whereas the human being as a human creation itself is defined by freedom. So it is indeed this consciousness. من هم میگم که consciousness یعنی که چیز میفهمن و بعد آزاد دارن بکنن. میدونی این دو چیز. So I would add to that and say that it's number one, the level of consciousness of being aware and recognizing situations, and then the freedom to choose which direction or which way they want to go are the defining two qualities of being a human being on a spiritual level, because the human being can, in fact, thereby decide their fate or decide their karma by acting in a way that's correspondent with a law such as the Shariat, or act against a certain law, against the Shariat. So in other words, the human being is free to choose. So the thing that separates the human being from the animal is freedom, okay? Is azad, is freedom, is what my lovely wife Saman is saying. And you said here, Rachel, you said that even the angels are following a program. Yeah. پس همه مالکات یعنی باید این که الله میخواد بکنن. یعنی فرشته نه این باید بکنن این که الله خواست، یعنی هیچ آزاد که ندارن.
خدا فرشته ها گفت انسان رو
راست
اگر بنده من هست چون میخواد، چون آزاده که اما فرشته که یعنی چون میخواد چه نمیخواد، یعنی باید این رو بکنه. راست و
سلام علیکم مستر برنن.
و فکر کنم شیطان که خب از جنس آتش بود و یک لول دیفرنت داشت از another فرشته ها، یعنی آزادی داشت که چوز کنه این رو بکنه یا نکنه. پس گفت اوه من هم یعنی این رو دارم که میخوام این رو بکنم یا نکنم، پس من سجده نمی کنم به انسان. من از آتش هستم که از توی هست
راست.
اما الله یعنی رو پرت کرد از اون لول بالاش پایین، یعنی انسان رو از این بالاتر و اونلی چیز بود که انسان رو به این لول رسید چون
آزاد کرد. So Samana is saying something very important, which is that just to translate, so it is actually freedom that made Allah say to the angels, bow down to Hazrat Adam alayhi salam and Hazrat Hawwa alayhi salam. So bow down to Adam and Eve. Yeah, it was the level of freedom that the humans had, because if you remember in the Qur'an, it says the angels, after the creation of the human being, they kind of complain to Allah and they say, why would you create this creature which is so bloodthirsty and just, you know, going to make problems and problems and problems? And Allah says, subhanahu wa ta'ala, I know what you do not know. Okay, I know what you do not know. And then he requests all the angels to bow down to Adam and Eve. And in fact, he gives one of the angels the freedom not to bow. Okay, and this, of course, we know his name was Iblis, a'udhu billah, or Shaitan, a'udhu billah, and he was an angel based on fire, not just on pure light, but on fire. And he had the choice to bow down or not bow down, and he chose not to bow down. And so Allah relegated him to be the gatekeeper of hell, if you will, Jahannam. A'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajim, because he refused to, despite his free will and despite his knowledge that the human creation was greater, he refused to bow down. So the component of freedom, consciousness plus freedom, is what separates human being from the angels and separates human being from the devil. A'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajim. So this is a really important component as well. Thank you very much for pointing this out. And yeah, I think Rachel was on tap waiting to speak, but we have a gentleman here named Brennan, I guess. Is that right? I see a picture of someone called Brennan, but I'm not really hearing anything.
موسیقی یعنی موزیک.
یا
موزیک فکر من این هست که خب در قرآن هم دو جا عبارت ساوند صحبت میکنه که میگه که یعنی زیبا صحبت کنید، با یک ریتم زیبا صحبت کنید و آهسته صحبت کنید که بدترین آوازها ساند دانکی. در قرآن دو تا این خب ساوند آواز چیز صحبت میکنه که چند مهم هست که با یک ریتم زیبا صحبت کنیم و فکر میکنم که خب یعنی اگر چیز که هست about خدا انسان رو میتونه بهش یک لول بده خوبه که با یک ریتم و ساوند زنده میشه یعنی موزیک آواز چیه یک ساوند زشت اما خب افکورس من با موزیک هایی که یعنی الان هست مثل نمیدونم راک اینها که انسان ها رو شکل
یا of course موافق نیستم راست ما موافقم
هایی که فرکانسش یعنی همین با فرکانس طبیعت مثلا یک بردز که آواز میکنه باد که میاد ساند دریا اینها همه هستن موزیکی
راست
حلال هست
راست So we just to catch up on Samana's thoughts before she maybe takes a turn with me. So basically, to catch up on the musical discussion that we had before, Rachel, based on, and Brennan, based on what we were discussing before at the beginning of the class, Samana is saying that in the Quran, the idea of a nice voice is mentioned. Speak to the people with the best of voices, and also it says the loudest voice is like the sound of a donkey. Yeah, so if you speak badly, it's like with the sound of a donkey. And of course, there's music that is coming from nature itself. So like the sound of the birds and the wind blowing through the leaves and the planets circling the sun in a certain rhythm and in a certain pattern, like music. And on the other hand, you have all these kind of human-made styles of music that are clearly promoting the values of shaitan, a'udhu billah, like rock music, rap music. We were talking about rap music, but rock music is also like that, or many different styles of modern day or postmodern day music are basically consolidating and somehow promoting the message of the devil, intending to mislead the humans away from the sirat al-mustaqim, taking them away from the straight path. So that's what differentiates halal from haram in terms of music. It's not to say that all music is haram. It's not to say that all music is halal, but the music that has the intention of taking the people away from the sirat al-mustaqim is definitely haram, yeah? And the music that, on the other hand, has the intention to lift the spirit of the human being to a higher level is clearly halal. And this is maybe the clearest way to differentiate whether music is halal or haram.
Yeah, I mean, like for me, I think the other thing too is I think I can't remember if somebody mentioned in the chat that that it's very easy to just stick your headphones on and not observe the beauty of nature around you and let that take you away, which I think is that's a really good point, because I tend to do that. You know, I'm staying with my mum at the moment and she's had back surgery, so I'm the one who's walking the dog.
Best of health to your mother, first of all.
Jazakallah khair, thank you. She's doing a lot better, actually. I was telling her about the yoga, actually. So
that's great.
Yeah, she's not at a stage where she can do anything like that yet, but I think, you know, that something like that would actually be really good for her, because she's quite active anyway. But that's, I think, would be something that would be a calming discipline for her rather than a jumping up and down discipline.
Oh yeah, definitely.
But yeah, but so I'm walking the dog now. So normally what I do is, you know, I stick my headphones in and I go off for a walk. And then I was thinking about the other day, which is actually true, because I haven't taken the time to pull the earplugs out and just listen to the wind rustling through the leaves or, you know, the birdies or that kind of thing. And I thought that was a really, really good point, actually, that even music that I would normally say is, you know, uplifting, because, you know, like I've mentioned, it's not my favorite piece because I've got other pieces too, but Beethoven's, you know, the second movement of that Seventh Symphony, I just, I could listen to that all day. But even things that I would say would be uplifting, or I would say would bring me closer to sort of understanding the beauty of the divine, you know, that I could use that as a way of not observing my surroundings and not observing the beauty in other areas too, if that makes sense.
Sure, completely. Yeah, I mean, of course, it's also a question of time management, right? But I believe that all life is musical. So, you know, even like, how am I acting at work now, or how am I treating my neighbors, or how am I going through the streets, just walking? How am I just walking, or how am I just breathing? I mean, breathing itself is extremely a musical thing, yeah, because it's very cyclical, and at the same time, It creates, it can create a harmony, or it can create dissonance, depending on how you breathe. So even a so-called simple act of just being consciously breathing in and out can lead you to a more conscious level, as you said. So, so breath itself is very much a musical thing in itself. And to tie that back to freedom, so of course, all these observations that we have, of course, require, or there's a prerequisite to this discussion, which is that, is music even allowed in society? Okay, and if we were to look at this from a jurisprudential viewpoint, should we allow all kinds of music or not? Yeah. This is certainly a big discussion, and this will be something that we talk maybe about in year 2, Islamic jurisprudence. But I see that we have a new, I don't know, new member, or whom you are, Mr. Brennan White. So would you like to introduce yourself? I don't know if you can hear us. Hello. Do you want to type something? If you can hear me, you can type something in the chat so we know that you're there. Okay. Anyway, you're welcome to listen, so welcome aboard. Yeah. Ah, great. There we go. Hello. Okay, it's nice to meet you. How do you know about us, Brennan? Let me just type. Peace be with you. With you. Okay, cool. How did you find us? That's cool. It's always nice to find new members spontaneously. I'm super interested. Okay, great, on Messenger. Fine, fair enough. So tell us, Brennan, what is your viewpoint? Because we've been talking now, we started actually about an hour ago, but we're talking now about freedom in Islam, and we talked about how freedom is the basis of a mature human being. A child doesn't have as much freedom as an adult, right? So the adult that has more freedom also at the same time has more responsibility, and therefore God will be somewhat stricter on the adult than on the child in terms of the repercussions of different decisions that we make, or the consequences of different decisions that we make in life. And the older we get, let's say, the more consequent Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is with us in our decisions. Having said all that, freedom is nevertheless the basis of our framework and our discussion of Islam, because without freedom, you cannot even choose to be a Muslim. You're either forced to be a Muslim, or you're not able to become a Muslim, both of which are very sad states. So you're a Zaidi Muslim from Virginia, and you're into Sufism. Wonderful. Okay, but I understand fully. Okay, no problem. So just listen in. We'll find a way to add you later to the chat, I guess. Is your Facebook name Brennan White ? Because then we can add you later, and or how can we add you? Questions, add you later, inshallah. Okay, so we'll figure that out along the way, but that's great. Welcome aboard. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Hosh amadid, marhaba. Okay, so yeah, so that's kind of to wrap up a little bit our discussion. I want to show you a little bit. I'm going to present on the screen what we discussed with Imam Razvi alayhi salam on the subject of freedom in Islam. And I kind of want to go through this text, and of course you'll get this text in the Team Delta chat. So this text is not going anywhere. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Third principle, year 1, the 10 principles of Islam. Third principle, Islam is freedom, maturing by responsibility. So I kind of want to read this to you, and of course I'm interested in your feedback. And then we'll go into next week's teamwork exercise in the group, and we'll see if we can find some exciting discussion and participation for the coming 4 weeks until the next class, inshallah. As a matter of fact, the December class might be a little bit earlier this year, because I might not be in Germany where I am now. I might be traveling, so I might not be able to teach a class at the end of December, which falls right between Christmas and New Year this year. So it might be that I pulled the class maybe 2 weeks earlier or something. So I hope that's okay for
yeah, inshallah, that's fine for me.
Great.
The only thing I'm struggling a little bit with is the time, because it's now 12 midnight for me.
Oh,
well,
oh
it's
my
actually
gosh.
1 o'clock in the morning now, so it
Wow.
starts at 12. So if there's any possibility we could start it a bit earlier or look at the time or something, that would be good. I know we had another member though that was really difficult for them.
Yeah, but they're not there today. So those members, as they say in Spanish, quien se fue a Sevilla perdió su silla. So the one that went to Seville lost their chair. So people need to come to class. So I'm totally flexible on it. People just give their different suggestions. What we'll do is we'll raise this again in the chat and see if we can find a more
inshallah
humane time for you. You know, I mean, I'm totally flexible. You know, I'm kind of, I keep this fourth Sunday in the month available for all of you. So depending on who comes when, you know, we can structure the time of the class a little bit differently. I guess in Virginia it must be like 7 in the morning now, I guess, something like that. So even Brennan is up pretty early in the morning, inshallah. So we will find a way.
I know
we will find a way.
I'm great with mornings. I'm not so great with evenings. I'm definitely turned into an early bird type of a person, but
that's great.
Inshallah, I'm keen. So even if I'm sort of sitting here at midnight, I can still, you know, inshallah khair. But yeah,
mashallah. But we will try to adapt. What I'm thinking is, if we do a class, I'm just trying to think. After my football viewing Sunday evenings is finished at 10 p.m. Hamburg time, 10 p.m. Hamburg would be what are we, 10 hours difference?
I've got the little time appy thing on my watch. So let me see. Hamburg at 10 p.m. Well, oh yeah, that'd be fine for me. That'd be 8 a.m. for me, which
8
is
in the morning,
no problem
right?
at all. Yeah,
but that would
8
be a
a.m. in the
Sunday, or that would be a Monday morning. Could you do a Monday morning?
So if it's 10 p.m. Hamburg on a Sunday, yeah, that'll be Monday morning. But I looked at my timetable, and next semester I don't have any classes on a Monday, so I've got a certain flexibility, so I could actually do it, you know, at 8 a.m. on a Monday. That'd be fine for me, inshallah khair.
Oh, inshallah. So that's great. So 8 a.m. would be okay for you on a Monday morning, yeah?
Yeah, yep. That'd be good, actually.
Fantastic, because I think that might be easier for Jenna also, who's in Alberta, Canada, and that wouldn't be 6 in the morning for her anymore, or 5 in the morning, but it would be more like, let me think, what are we, 8 hours difference? So that might be 2 p.m. for her, or something like that. So that might be more easy for her to join class, because I know she was struggling with getting up in the morning.
Yeah.
Although we should be doing it for our prayer, but that's another matter. Sometimes I forget to. Sometimes I sleep through it. I won't pretend to be free of error, but certainly that could be a perfect solution for everybody, really.
Yeah, inshallah.
In this particular team, because I've had different teams, you know, over the 4 years that we've been doing this. You know, we've had different teams from all different parts of the world, and every time it's somewhat of a discussion. It's like, what is the time zone exactly? Let's see how we meet. You know, Singapore with Los Angeles. Okay, what do we do? And this kind of thing. But great. So let's jump. Let's circle back to that at the end of the class. But I'm just going to kind of blast through this, and I just ask you please to raise your hand or just speak if there's something that you want to comment. So again, these texts are always, you know, they derive from the notebook that I took my classes with, and that was signed off by my teacher, Imam Razvi alayhi salam, who's this gentleman here. If I can zoom in a little bit. This is my lovely teacher. Oh yeah, I've got, of course, the great picture here. Bismillah. So you can see him here. And so you can see my lovely teacher. And these texts here are somewhat of the results of our discussions. So definitely giving all credit to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and my teacher from the Ahlul Bayt, Sayyid Mahdi Imam Razvi alayhi salam. So Islam is freedom in theory and practice, maturing within holistic boundaries of personal responsibility and societal responsibility. Firstly and foremostly, herein are included the freedoms of personal viewpoint, expression, research, and practice of religion, spirituality, and philosophy, as well as the various teachings of Islam and any spiritual tradition in all their many variations, cultures, traditions, and colors. Okay, Islam has always been very receptive to culture. And you can see that if you go to Senegal, okay, you'll find a very different style of Islam than you'll find in Indonesia, for example, or than you'll find in India, or than you'll find in Turkey, or in any of the Arab countries. So of course, it's adapted everywhere it's gone, even though many times the outward names of the jurisprudences appear to be the same. But we had that discussion earlier that even a Maliki in Senegal might have a very different cultural approach than a Maliki from Scotland, okay? Because we had a great Scottish sheikh in the Maliki tradition for many years who unfortunately recently passed. So to successfully attain such a high degree of individual freedom in a collective human society, such freedom must be deeply rooted in care and responsibility of further individuals and society, and on a deep and profound trust in the positive, transformative effects of Islam. Therefore, the path of freedom means going from being an individual human being to being an inclusional human being, or an inclusive human being. Okay, that word inclusional is somewhat of a made-up word, and what it means is I'm not freedom to just be myself and, you know, kind of be on an island, but I also have the freedom to open myself up and enter into conversation. As we said earlier today, in reconstructivist philosophy, we say truth is not a dogma, it's a conversation, okay? So from a Quranic perspective, such freedom also includes an individual's full human right to remain outside Islam and or leave Islam upon their own free will. While a superficial Quran reading will have many people, including many Muslims, believing that apostasy is punishable by death, a deeper contextualized reading provides insight into the very context-specific historical nature of certain such particular ayat in the Quran or revelations, whereas the Quranic verses allowing for freedom of religion and accepting further religions such as Christianity, Judaism, and Zoroastrianism are generalist in their tone and composition. Why is that important? Because in jurisprudence, general law always creates the framework. Okay? What do I mean by that? If you take the framework of the US Constitution and the attached Bill of Rights, okay, or the Magna Carta, or even the very ancient constitution drafted by the great Persian Shah Kurosh Kabir 5,000 years ago, in cuneiform, knocked into stone, which guaranteed freedom of religion and wages for all workers and equal treatment between men and women, or even the Constitution of Medina, which was drafted by the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ and agreed by all the Arabic and Jewish tribes at his time in Medina ﷺ. All of these documents begin with a generalistic perspective. Why? Because generalism trumps specificity every time, okay? In law. Laws can be specified according to context or according to moment, but general principles of a legal framework always prevail, are always maintained, and carry themselves throughout the existence of a jurisprudence. This is regardless of whether we're talking about Islamic jurisprudence, secular jurisprudence, communist jurisprudence, whatever kind of jurisprudence you have, you always start with the most general levels of the principles of the law, and then you break it down and get more specific in one direction, another more specific in another, another more specific in another, another more specific in another. It cannot be any other way, okay? Just like the roots of a tree, it starts with one, set of roots, and then it grows into this big, towering trunk, and then the branches come, and of course the fruits, yeah? But this one trunk is coming from the earth. And it's a very similar way in law in general. Again, not just Islamic law, any law, okay? Always starts from a very general level, and then it gets broken down into individual guidelines. So, therefore, when we read the Quran, we are, as always, through the construction of logic that we just provided, or reason that we just provided, we are encouraged to approach Islamic jurisprudence in such a way that the general laws form the framework, and then the specificity of the law emerges. So these ayat, la ikraha fi din, dhalika al-kitabu la rayba fi, and if we go back into Baqarah is a great surah for jurisprudence, by the way. Second surah of the Qur'an. Or here we have A'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajim, Bismillahir Rahim. Inna alladhina amanu waladhina haduwa wan nasraya was-sabiina min aman Allah bi Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And if you continue going in this direction, the ayat is clearly saying that or the believers, or the Christians, or the Jews, or the Sabi'in, who are, many say are the Zoroastrians, all of them shall be, all of those who believe in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and do good works in the name of Allah, they shall receive their full reward and they have nothing to fear. So this shows, again, this is a very generalist verse in the Quran that displays the amount of freedom of religion and accepting further religions such as Christianity, Judaism, and perhaps Zoroastrianism, any religion based on the idea of one God and what we could consider Ahl al-Kitab, the people of the book. And you can see that these ayats are generalists in their tone and composition. It's not for a specific time or specific moment or in a specific situation, okay? So it's very important to understand where that framework of jurisprudence is coming from. And this is very similar to, Imam Razvi said something very similar to what my lovely wife Samana just previously said, which was that the difference between the man and the beast is simply this, that man or human is free to exercise their conscience, okay? Why don't I just gender that? Because I'll save it. Because that is exactly the point. An animal is somehow tied down by the law of nature, and their consciousness is not expanded to understand that. But a human being is freed to a certain extent from these bondages of nature, and they have the consciousness to explore and expand on that, and to have a discussion like we're having now. Yeah. And finally, freedom for individual and society creates enthusiasm, and such freely born enthusiasm in turn creates motivation for great common humanistic labors in society. Okay. So any questions or comments so far?
I just think that's a really great point about freedom creates motivation, because even in the work sense, you know, like, I'm very fortunate, alhamdulillah, that I have a lot of freedom in my work, in that, you know, in terms of how I design my classes, you know, I have to give classes at certain times, but other than that, I have a lot of freedom with my day and what I choose to do in my day. And that, in a sense, has made me very motivated, because I'm, you know, like I enjoy my work. I enjoy thinking, well, today I'm going to do this and I'm going to do that, and I'm going to, you know, like, it's when I have to go to all these meetings, or I have to, you know, do the bureaucracy and the paperwork, that's kind of deadening. I mean, I understand a lot of it's necessary. I don't think all of it's necessary, but a lot of it's necessary. But it's when I've got you know, I wake up in the morning thinking, oh, great, okay, I'm teaching this class, but then I'm going to, you know, I'm going to sit down and do some writing on this chapter, or do this and that. And it empowers you. It makes you want to go to work and do your work. And alhamdulillah, I'm very lucky that I've got that opportunity. And freedom does create motivation.
Mashallah, mashallah, that's wonderful. Yeah, I mean, I definitely feel the same about this Hawza, for example, about this Unity Hawza that we're in now. I've been blessed to meet my dear Zaidi Mu'tazili Sufi Chishti Imam, Sayyid Razvi alayhi salam, and definitely he gave me this wonderful task to bring his teachings into the world, and I feel extremely privileged to be able to do that. And I absolutely not only feel free, but I feel extremely privileged to have this freedom and have this opportunity. So I know exactly what you mean, yeah? And so what I would say is, and we have the freedom to be Muslims. Look, I mean, we have the freedom to have converted, right? So this is a beautiful freedom, and that's why I always say, you know, I'm very happy. Unlike many Muslims, I'm very grateful for the so-called Western secular framework, which has allowed me the opportunity to convert to Islam after a lot of study and research and philosophy, and looking at the 73 different sects of Islam and rejecting 72 of them, and finally finding my own path. So I feel extremely privileged to be living today. Many people say it's a dark time. I would say it's always been a dark time for true Islam, you know, especially from a Shia perspective. It's always been a dark time, but nowadays, you know, anyone in the world can go online, really go to a bookstore, go online, check the information themselves, engage with people that are coming from different cultures and religious backgrounds and personal histories, and you know, find their way. And this is a maybe once in a lifetime opportunity, or once in a civilizational really opportunity to find our own truth and create truth as a conversation in a way that's perhaps never been done before in human history. So I think it's a beautiful time actually to be living. I'm very grateful for the time we live in. I'm very grateful to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And yet this freedom must never be used to exploit others, nor to wreak havoc in society. That's why responsibility, right? Freedom does not mean you have the right to take an AK-47 and go in a shopping mall and gun everybody down. That's not what freedom means, okay? So freedom is equally correlating with responsibility, as we discussed before. And that's why Shariat, okay? That's why law and jurisprudence and finding the Shariat of our time, finding the jurisprudence of our time is very fundamental. It's not the same Shariat as during the time of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, but many things have been transitioned and can be applied today, but some things are different, okay? And when we want to talk about what's changed and what stays the same, then you should come to our year 2 class, Islamic Jurisprudence, Usul al-Fiqh, inshallah. So by the Quran, we're urged to follow the straight path. And in this respect, freedom in Islam is certainly to be qualified by our 2 previous commandments or principles of humaneness and reason. Principles, Islamic principles, as taught by Imam Razvi, of, as you remember from the last classes, from humaneness and reason. Okay. Excellent. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم لا إكراه في الدين قد تبين الرشد من الغي فمن يكفر بالطاغوت ويؤمن بالله فقد استمسك بالعروة الوثقى لا انفصام لها والله سميع عليم. صدق الله العلي العظيم. There is no compulsion in religion. Surely the righteous path has been clarified from the wrong. And those who reject false idols and trust in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala attach themselves to that anchor most stable and unyielding. You'll find this in life. You'll find this in life. If we stick to the Quran and to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and to the Ahlul Bayt, to the family of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, in our darkest moments, we will never be alone. In our darkest moments, we will never be alone. This I can promise you, both from personal experience and from deep reading and understanding of the Quran itself. And I encourage you to use your freedom wisely, to discover Allah and the family of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and dive deeper into Islamic philosophy, and join us in our further Hawzas here in the Unity Hawza, our further classes. And now I'll invite you to ask any questions, make any comments to close our subject, Islam is freedom within responsibility today. Go for it.
I don't have any specific things, except it did strike me that we're we're moving from a state of dependence when we're, you know, children, or, you know, as human beings, you know, as you mentioned before, where we very much lived very structured lives where there was no sense of moving outside of the boundaries because that was just the world that we lived in, to sort of independence where we're trying to break free of all the boundaries. But, you know, independence is quite a solitary state, to interdependence where, you know, we are fully functioning, but we are also at the state. It's like every part of the body has some element that works in tandem with the other part of the body. And, you know, if one part of the body suffers, then, you know, it's like that hadith. If one member of the ummah is suffering, then you know, everybody is, the whole body suffers. So we're interdependent. We're not completely independent. We don't live, you know, on little islands with no, you know, even our bodies require the cooperation of beings other than ourselves, because, you know, all the little bacteria that live in our gut are really what keeping us alive. And we think that we're, you know, we're all independent, we're all interconnected. So that's what I think has really struck me from today. And so the freedom really comes from recognizing this and then agreeing to work with others to build a more prosperous life and a more prosperous society.
I love it. I love it. I totally take that with me too. That's a great point there, Rachel. So dependence, I wrote it here in the chat just so we don't forget it. So dependence in generations past has led to a certain level of independence. In today's societies, moving toward interdependence, the knowledge and understanding of how things are interrelated and how things are connected, such as you mentioned, the little bacteria in our stomachs that are allowing us to live in the first place. Yeah, so I really appreciate that. Thank you very much. And it's, in fact, why don't we look at this? Why don't we make that our teamwork, okay, for the next, because I think that's a really interesting teamwork. Our team exercise in the Delta group, let's make it that everyone shall choose an example and discuss on it of how a society or a culture in Islam particularly has moved from dependence through independence and into interdependence. Let's make that our team exercise. And anyone can be a country, or it can be a culture, or it can be a part of the world, or it can be an art form in Islam, or it can be a human being themselves going through an inner realization, or it can be anything you want. You can all choose what you'd like to take as the basis for this exercise. You're totally free. You're free to choose. Okay. Does that sound like a plan?
Alhamdulillah, sounds good.
Wonderful. Alhamdulillah. So to close for today, let's please all read Fatiha. A'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajim. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Ar-Rahmanir Rahim. Maliki Yawmiddin. Iyyaka na'budu wa iyyaka nasta'in. Ihdina as-siratal mustaqim. Siratal ladzina an'amta 'alayhim ghayril maghdubi 'alayhim waladdallin. Ameen. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Ameen. Okay. I want to say thank you so much.
Jazakallah khair. Thank you.
Wonderful. I'm a
Lovely to meet you, Brennan.
Thanks, Sir Brennan. Thank you, Samanajin. Thank you, Mati Kurosh. And thank you, Brennan. And let me see if I can add you, Brennan, to our class. And Rachel, get a good night's sleep. And we'll talk about Monday mornings during the chat. Okay.
Jazakallah khair. Thank you so much.
Thank you all so much. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Bye bye.